interviews and home visits for new recruits to improvements for information sharing around transfers. In addition to the shortcomings in vetting and recruitment, the report shows very clearly how police investigations of indecent exposure were poor. Those offences were treated as low level by the investigating officers. Decisions to close some cases were taken early with minimal investigation. I am calling for a step change in the way police respond to indecent exposure cases. More research is needed to understand the link between this offence and the likely trajectory towards serious contact offending. And even without that trajectory, victims deserve to have their cases investigated properly each and every time. Attitudes towards the experience of those victimised by alleged incidents of exposure were not commensurate with the harm caused. In 2015, a member of the public telephoned Kent Police, having just seen a man driving a car while indecently exposing himself. This same witness gave the police the make, model, colour and registration number of the car, information that was confirmed by automatic number plate recognition cameras operating in the area. In almost no time, checks by the police identified Cousins as the registered keeper of the car. However, despite having his home address and knowing that he was the only male insured to drive the car, Kent Police closed the case and took no further action. They did so without making any attempt to speak to a further witness or to Cousins himself. This was a grave error and a very obvious red flag. By failing to properly investigate the allegation, Kent Police missed a valuable opportunity to disrupt or even prevent Cousins' future offending and to bring into question his position as an authorised firearms officer with the CNC. Victims reported allegations of indecent exposure to the police on 4 occasions before Cousins' arrest. The 2 allegations reported to Kent were inadequately investigated. In addition to the 2015 allegation, Kent Police also responded to an allegation of masturbatory indecent exposure directed at a lone cyclist in a narrow country lane in 2020. With limited investigation, the case was closed. Had the investigation been more thorough, it is possible that Cousins might have been identified as an alleged sex offender and his offending and policing career disrupted. Just days before he abducted Sarah Everard, Cousins was reported for exposing himself at a drive-through. The investigation into these allegations by the Metropolitan Police Service also fell below the standards any victim of crime should expect. For example, available evidence such as CCTV was not collected or considered. He was only interviewed and charged for those further offences of indecent exposure after his conviction for Sarah's murder. He was convicted for 2 of the reported crimes at the drive-through and the crime where he was reported for masturbating towards a lone cyclist on a narrow country lane. The inquiry is aware of 5 other alleged incidents of sexual offending involving Cousins, which, for many understandable reasons, were never reported to the police. Given the known underreporting of sexual offences, I believe there may be even more victims of Cousins offending. Data tells us that women do not always report being victims of indecent exposure. Evidence of the inquiry show that policing does not always respond to it as it should. I make recommendations about improving the ways that police respond to those who report such crimes. I also recommend an immediate review be undertaken of indecent exposure allegations against serving police officers. My task in part 1 of the inquiry was to examine the facts and circumstances of the case of Wayne Cousins and the cultures in which he worked. Policing is, however, not a homogeneous whole. Pockets of different cultures exist within police forces, and police culture is something that will be examined during part 2 of this inquiry. Good police officers work alongside those who abuse their powers, behave inappropriately with their colleagues, and do a disservice to the profession of policing. Some, like Cousins, manipulate their image at work to avoid drawing attention to themselves. Outside of work, Cousins was reported in 2020 to have been seen wearing a police belt and items of police equipment while off duty. He described himself as an undercover officer. He was not. Although Wayne Cousins was not wholly a product of his working environments, those environments did nothing to discourage his misogynistic view of women and meant that providing he presented himself as professional, his deviant behaviour outside of work could flourish. Policing leaders need to radically transform their approach to police culture if future offenders like Cousins are to be denied opportunities to abuse police powers for sexual purpose. It is time certain types of behaviour, from the unacceptable to the criminal, and low standards are simply not tolerated in policing. This report is part 1 of the Angiolini inquiry. Part 2 is underway, and the terms of reference for this work includes a broader national consideration of police vetting and recruitment, police culture and standards, and the protection of women in public spaces. This includes other tragic cases of femicide in public spaces. My approach to Part 2 is informed by what I have learned during the course of Part 1. Part 3 of the inquiry is an investigation into the crimes and career of former Metropolitan Police Officer David Carrick. That work is also underway. The 16 recommendations I make are not all new. Failures of investigation, failures of HR processes, and failures of vetting policy and practice are a depressingly familiar refrain in policing. Now is the time for change. Without a significant overhaul, there is nothing to stop another Wayne Cousins operating in plain sight. I would urge all those in authority in every police force in the country to read this report and take immediate action. Sarah's parents and loved ones live in the perpetual grief and pain of having lost Sarah in this way. Her death and the public discourse it caused should galvanise those responsible for policing to ensure that those who have the privilege and power of protecting us can be trusted. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.